exhausted. And I know that. No matter how much you try to think positively, no matter how many mantras you repeat or how many motivational videos you watch, negative thoughts keep coming back. They come at night when everything is quiet. They appear in the middle of work without warning. And every time they arise, you wage a mental war, trying to expel them as if they were invaders. But what no one told you, what the toxic positivity industry will never admit, is that this internal war is precisely what is fueling those thoughts. You have been trained to believe that negative thoughts are flaws, that having doubts, fears, insecurities, or even anger is a sign of weakness, of a wrong mindset, that you need to fix yourself. So you try to erase them with empty affirmations. You try to distract yourself with instant pleasure. You try to pretend that everything is fine while a part of you is begging to be heard. And that part doesn't go away just because you told it to shut up. Carl Jung understood something that few have the courage to admit. The more you fight against a psychic content, the more energy you give it. The psyche works by compensation. And everything that is repressed doesn't disappear. It just shifts to the unconscious and gains strength. Your mind is not broken. It is trying to get your attention. When you think, "I am a failure," that is not a mental software error. It is the symbolic expression of an old wound, perhaps from a childhood where you were never recognized, or from years living a life that doesn't reflect who you really are. When the thought, "nothing makes sense," arises, it may not be chemical depression. It may be the soul screaming that you have strayed too far from your most authentic values. And here is the truth that no one wants to face. Fighting against what you feel is the exact recipe for getting stuck in it forever. Negative thinking is not an enemy. It is a message. And if you learn to listen to it, to understand it, to integrate that part of you that you keep trying to annihilate, something changes. You stop being a slave to your mind and start becoming an ally of it. This video is not just another empty piece of advice to think positive. It is an invitation to face what you have been avoiding for years. It's about stopping the escape and starting to listen. It's about no longer being a victim of repression and becoming a master of integration. Because, as Jung said, you only become whole when you are able to hold both light and shadow at the same time, without rejecting either. Now I want you to take a deep breath and pay attention. This is not self-help. This is deep psychology. And if you are ready to stop running from your own mind, then keep watching. Because what you are going to learn here can radically change the way you deal with your thoughts and with your life. Stop for a moment and be honest with yourself. The more you try not to think about something, the more it occupies your mind. The harder you strive to move on, the heavier everything feels inside. This is not a coincidence. It's not bad luck. And it's definitely not because you are failing to be strong enough. For Jung, this happens because you are violating one of the most fundamental laws of the psyche. All one-sidedness is compensated. The human mind does not function like a battlefield where the one who represses the most wins. It functions like a living system that constantly seeks balance. Jung observed that whenever consciousness insists on identifying only with one side of experience, strength, control, positivity, rationality, success, the unconscious reacts by bringing to the surface exactly what has been excluded: fear, doubt, sadness, a sense of emptiness, thoughts you would rather not have. This is not sabotage, it is correction. The problem begins when you interpret this correction as a threat, when you believe that these negative thoughts are flaws that need to be eliminated. From that moment on, you enter into war against yourself. And every internal war has a very high energetic cost. Jung said that what is repressed not only remains active in the unconscious, but becomes more charged with psychic energy. In other words, the more you try to push something away, the more strength you give it. That's why forced positivity is so dangerous. It creates the illusion of control, while accumulating pressure at the bottom of the psyche. You repeat positive phrases, maintain the appearance of stability, keep functioning on the outside. But inside, something begins to rot in silence. The energy that cannot express itself consciously transforms into symptoms. Anxiety without an apparent cause, constant irritation, a feeling of always being tired, even without a clear reason, or, in more extreme cases, sudden collapses that seem to come out of nowhere. But they never come out of nowhere. Jung compared this process to a dam. As long as you keep everything under control, it seems like nothing is happening, but the water keeps rising. And when the structure can no longer hold, the rupture is violent. This is what he called enantiodromia, the inevitable reversal into the opposite. The person who has spent years trying to be always positive falls into deep depression. Those who controlled everything rigidly are overtaken by internal chaos. Those who denied their own fragility crumble when they least expect it. And here is the hardest point to accept. The psyche does not do this to punish you. It does this to save you. It desperately tries to restore a balance that consciousness refuses to accept. The negative thoughts you hate are not random defects of the brain. They are attempts at compensation. They are signs that something essential has been ignored for too long. As long as you continue to treat these thoughts as enemies, the only thing you will achieve is to strengthen them. Because all repression requires energy. And that energy does not disappear. It accumulates. And the more energy and unconscious content accumulates, the more it begins to dominate your emotional state, your decisions, and your perception of reality. But there is another way, a path that Jung advocated clearly, the path of listening, not repression. To follow this path, you need to abandon the idea that negative thoughts are mistakes to be corrected. You need to start seeing them as symbolic messages that carry vital information about your life, your wounds, and your deepest conflicts. And that is exactly what we will explore next. What these thoughts are really trying to tell you, and why they are not your enemies, but messengers of what you have yet to have the courage to face. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You grew up believing that negative thoughts are symptoms of something wrong with you, as if they were mental viruses that need to be eliminated, corrected, fought against. But what if you were completely wrong? What if these thoughts were not a defect in your psychic functioning, but a language, a type of symbolic communication that your soul uses when it has tried in every way to get your attention and failed? For Jung, recurring negative thoughts are not random errors of the mind. They are symbolic expressions of unconscious contents trying to emerge to the surface of consciousness. And more than that, they arise as attempts to restore psychic balance. When your external life strays too far from your internal truth, the psyche responds. And this response often comes in the form of dark thoughts. Think of a classic example. That persistent thought of, "I am a failure." The traditional approach tries to combat it with positive affirmations. "No, you are a winner. Everything will be fine." But that doesn't solve anything, because the thought is just the symptom. It is the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it, there is a deep sea of past experiences, unprocessed emotions, and beliefs formed in pain. Perhaps this thought comes from a childhood where you were demanded too much and praised too little. Perhaps it comes from a phase of life where you betrayed your own values to please others. Perhaps it is saying that the path you are on is not really yours. The point is, it is trying to show you something you need to look at, even if it hurts. Jung believed that denying this content is denying yourself, that ignoring these signs from the soul is living a disconnected life, where everything seems right on the outside, but deeply wrong on the inside. Negative thoughts do not want to destroy you. They want to wake you up. And this applies to all kinds of thoughts you try to suppress. When you feel that you are always in danger, that something bad is going to happen, that the future threatens you. Perhaps your mind is not exaggerating. Perhaps it is showing you that you live in a constant state of alert because you have never felt truly safe. Perhaps the past is still operating in the present, and the anxious thought is a plea for real security, not a comforting illusion. When you feel that nothing makes sense, that life is empty, that everything has lost its shine, perhaps it is not a chemical disorder. Perhaps it is the soul's cry saying, "You have strayed too far from what really matters. You are living a life that does not represent you. You are following someone else's script." What most call cognitive distortion, Jung called a symbol. The negative thought for him was like a letter from the unconscious, and every time you try to tear up that letter before reading it, you only ensure that it will be resent, with more force, with more urgency. So the question you need to ask is not, how do I eliminate this thought? But rather, what is it trying to tell me? This shift in question changes everything, because you move from being an enemy of your mind to being an explorer of your soul. But to start this process, you will need to learn something that can completely change your relationship with your thoughts. How to create distance between what you think and who you really are. And that is what we will explore in the next part. How to observe your thoughts without being dominated by them, and reclaim the power you handed over to your mind. So far, you believed that your thoughts said something essential about who you are. You thought, "I am a failure," and believed it. "No one loves me" came up, and you took it as absolute truth. The mind formulated, "Everything will go wrong," and you began to live as if you were already condemned. But what if I told you that you are not your thoughts? That there is a deeper, quieter you that observes these thoughts, but is not defined by them? Jung understood that true freedom begins the moment you create distance between consciousness and the content of the mind. He taught that the psyche is formed by multiple internal voices, archetypes, complexes, emotional fragments, all coexisting within us. And the self that suffers is usually the one that is too identified with just one of those voices. When you believe you are the negative thought, you become at its mercy. But when you learn to observe it as something happening within you, and not as you, the structure changes completely. Imagine the following. You are in a room, and there is a television on. On the screen, a movie about failure, fear, rejection is playing. That is the negative thought. Most people live glued to the screen, believing that is the only possible reality. But you are not the screen. You are the one sitting in the room, the observer. And the moment you remember this, you begin to regain the control you thought you had lost forever. This is where fundamental practices like distancing language come in. When you think, "I am inadequate," that thought swallows you. But if you change the language to, "I am having the thought that I am inadequate," something separates. The internal space expands, and where there is space, there is the possibility of choice. The thought ceases to be an order and becomes a transient phenomenon. Jung said that the unconscious manifests through images, symbols, and spontaneous thoughts. They emerge, but do not necessarily tell the whole truth. Consciousness needs to dialogue with them, interpret them, integrate them. And this is only possible when you are not fused with the psychic content. When you are the sky, and the thought is just a passing cloud. This practice is called cognitive diffusion in some contemporary approaches, but the essence was already present in Jung's depth psychology. If you fuse with the thought, it possesses you. If you observe it, it loses its hold. So, every time a negative thought arises, practice this. Instead of saying, "I am useless," say, "I am having the thought that I am useless." Instead of asserting, "No one loves me," say, "My mind is creating a scenario where I feel rejected." Instead of, "Everything will go wrong," say, "I am noticing a catastrophic thought passing through my consciousness." It seems simple, But this movement of language generates a psychic reorganization. It reaffirms that there is something greater within you than the content that is emerging. An observing consciousness, an anchor, a presence. And this presence is the beginning of true healing. But what if, in addition to observing, you could directly dialogue with these thoughts? What if you could ask them why they are there, what they want to show you, what function they are trying to fulfill? In the next part, we will dive into one of the most powerful techniques Jung left us: active imagination. Now that you have learned to create distance between yourself and your thoughts, it is time to take the next step, to enter into a conscious dialogue with them. It sounds strange, I know. Talking to thoughts, listening to their responses, but this is one of the deepest practices that Jung developed, and one of the most transformative. It is called active imagination, and it consists of something simple yet powerful: allowing unconscious content to have a voice. And, most importantly, allowing yourself to hear it. Think of it this way: every recurring thought carries an intention behind it. Even the darkest, harshest, most uncomfortable ones. They are not arising by chance. They have a function, a message, a purpose, no matter how dysfunctional it may seem. The problem is that, as we have been taught to suppress, judge, or fear these thoughts, we never stop to listen to what they are really trying to tell us. Jung believed that when unconscious content is not integrated, it acts as an autonomous entity within the psyche. In other words, it is as if a part of your mind starts to function independently of you. This part thinks, speaks, repeats messages, interferes with your decisions, and you feel as if you are fighting against yourself. Active imagination serves to bring this part to the light of consciousness, to give it a name, a symbolic form, a voice, and thus dissolve its tyrannical power. And the process is more accessible than it seems. You just need paper, silence, and courage. Start like this. When a negative thought arises, sit with it, close your eyes, visualize it as a figure, a person, an animal, a shadow, whatever comes to your mind. Give it a body, a face, a name if you wish. And then begin the dialogue. Write on the paper, word by word, without censorship, without judgment. Just ask, you, why do you keep coming back? Thought, because you need to understand something you are ignoring. You, what am I ignoring? Thought, the wound you carry from that rejection, the pain of not feeling enough. I appear to remind you of that. You may be surprised by what emerges. Many negative thoughts have a distorted protective function. They are trying to prevent you from exposing yourself to risk, pain, failure. They are trying to control future suffering, even if it means trapping you in the present. Consider this example. You, why do you always tell me I am a failure? Thought, because if you believe that, you will never really try. And if you never try, you will never be humiliated again. This logic may seem absurd, but to the unconscious, it makes sense. The mind prefers familiar suffering to the risk of the unknown, even if it costs you your freedom, your joy, your authentic life. And that is why when you hear this thought, recognize its intention, and offer a new form of protection, it dissolves. It no longer needs to scream to be heard. You can respond like this. You, thank you for trying to protect me, but now I can fail and survive. I can take risks and still embrace myself. I no longer need to live in fear of myself. This is the true power of active imagination. It transforms the internal enemy into an ally. It returns to consciousness what was previously exiled. And when that happens, the thought loses its destructive charge, because for the first time, it has been heard with attention and respect. And now that you have started to converse with your thoughts, it is time to develop an even more challenging skill, and perhaps the most essential of Jung's journey: learning to hold opposites within yourself without collapsing. Holding the paradox without fleeing or fighting In the next part, you will discover why trying to replace a negative thought with a positive one may be doing you more harm than good, and how to find strength in living with the contradictions of your own soul. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. You spent your life believing that you had to choose a side, light or shadow, strength or fragility, faith or doubt, hope or despair, positive or negative thoughts. But what if I told you that this need to choose is precisely what keeps you trapped? Jung shows us something that goes against everything the modern binary mindset tries to teach us. True psychological maturity begins when you are able to hold two opposites at the same time, without needing to destroy one to validate the other. This is one of the most revolutionary ideas in analytical psychology. The psyche does not seek constant positivity, but the integration of opposites. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, and this is exactly what most people cannot do, because it hurts, because it requires complexity, because it forces you to step out of the comfort of simple thinking, the kind that divides everything into right or wrong, good or bad, positive or negative. When a negative thought arises, the immediate impulse is to combat it with its opposite. I can't think like that. I need to focus on the good side. I need to be grateful. But what happens is that, by doing this, you are not integrating anything. You are creating an internal war. You are trying to silence one part of your psyche with the voice of another. And, as we have seen, every part that is silenced comes back stronger. Now, imagine doing it differently. Imagine looking inward and saying, a part of me feels like a failure, and another part knows that I have worth and am growing. Both are true. Both exist in me, and I can hold this tension without collapsing. Do you notice the shift? Instead of trying to annihilate one side, you acknowledge it. You recognize that pain exists, that fear is real, that negative thinking has its reason for being. And at the same time, you affirm the part of yourself that is not reduced to that. This is not optimism. This is wholeness. It is presence. It is the courage to see the entirety without trying to reduce it to a comfortable half. Most people want quick solutions. They want catchy phrases that solve everything. They want to banish the negative and live only in the positive. But this is a childish illusion. Jung knew that the human soul does not operate in extremes. It develops in the midst of paradox. And it is precisely in that middle, in that uncomfortable place between the poles, that transformation happens. Practice this consciously. When the thought, I am inadequate, comes, say, a part of me believes that, and another part recognizes that I am learning, growing, evolving. Both coexist. When the thought, everything will go wrong, comes, say, a part of me is afraid, and another part trusts that I can handle whatever comes. I can feel both. You no longer need to eliminate pain to affirm strength. You don't need to erase fear to access courage. You don't need to deny the shadow to live the light. You need to be big enough to hold both at the same time. And this requires a psyche that has stopped fleeing from complexity and has begun to inhabit it. But perhaps the most important point of all is yet to come. Because none of this works if, deep down, you still believe that having negative thoughts is a sign of weakness. Or worse, a sign that you are broken. Therefore, in the next part, we will do something that most have never truly had the courage to do. Fully accept the existence of negative thoughts as a natural part of the human condition, not as a flaw, but as a legitimate expression of the soul. We have reached one of the most difficult and liberating points of this entire journey: radical acceptance. Not the passive acceptance that you say out loud while inside you still want to get rid of what you feel, but the deep, conscious, courageous acceptance that negative thoughts are part of the human experience. That having them does not mean you are broken, lost, or spiritually inferior. It simply means you are human, and that you are alive. Jung never promised a path without pain. On the contrary, he knew that the true process of individuation, that is, the development of a full and authentic identity, required the individual to face everything that has been repressed, denied, and forgotten within themselves. Negative thoughts are not obstacles on the path to healing. They are the path itself. They are the trails that the soul traces to guide you back to what has been abandoned. And what has been abandoned is often what needs to be rescued the most. You have learned to treat your thoughts as enemies, as viruses to be eliminated, as flaws to be corrected. But Jung offers us a brutal and liberating twist. What you call a defect may be a plea for reconnection. What you call negativity may be a fragment of yourself crying out to come back home. Radical acceptance begins when you stop criticizing yourself for having negative thoughts. When, instead of asking yourself, "Why do I still think this way?" you say, "It's natural for me to think this way, considering what I've lived." This simple phrase contains more therapeutic power than 1,000 positivity mantras, because it acknowledges your history, your pain, your patterns, your real, not idealized path. Accepting is not surrendering to darkness. It is stopping fleeing from it. It is becoming capable of walking in it without getting lost. Because now you have enough light within you not to be swallowed. You have learned to observe your thoughts, to dialogue with them, to listen to their messages, to hold the paradoxes. And now finally, you can let them exist without war, without escape, without despair. This does not mean that negative thoughts will disappear. They will continue to arise, like any living part of the psyche. But now, they will no longer have tyrannical power over you, because you have stopped identifying with them and started to understand them. They do not define who you are. They are just passing voices in a vast inner theater. And you, finally, are sitting in the chair of consciousness, watching with clarity, with presence, with authority. Jung said that the true strength of the ego is not in dominating the mind, but in being able to hold opposites without collapsing. This is psychic maturity. This is inner freedom. This is what you are building, step by step, thought by thought, with every decision to look within without fleeing. Now tell me in the comments, what has been the negative thought that has dominated you the most until today? And what have you realized about it now? Share if you can, because sometimes putting this into words is the first act of liberation. And continue with us. The next video is as important as this one, perhaps even more so. You have already taken deep steps today, but the journey is not over yet. The truth still has more to reveal. See you there.